There's a common assumption that mergers and acquisitions put organizations at more risk of cyber attacks. But is there any data to back up this theory?
You're listening to Defense in Depth.
Welcome to Defense in Depth. My name is David Spark. I'm the producer of the CISO series, and joining me as a guest co-host. We've actually had her on before as a guest co-host, and we've had her on as a guest, too. Thrilled to have her back. It is none other than Christina Shannon, who's the CIO of Kick Consumer Products. And by the way, she's been a CISO many times as well, too. Christina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, David. Always a joy to be here.
Awesome. Now, I do want to mention our awesome sponsor for today's episode, and that is Cyera, holistic data security in one cloud platform. We're going to be talking more about data security a little bit later in the show. But first, let's get to our main topic at hand here, Christina. It's not too hard to see why a merger or acquisition could increase risk to an organization, all right? But Michael Santarcangelo of Security Catalyst asked on LinkedIn, do we have evidence that this actually leads to an increase in actual cyber attacks? We have a lot of anecdotal evidence. I mean, people have said things, but do we have hard figures to back up what is kind of an obvious gut feeling? I mean, A, have you seen it, or is it mostly a gut feeling and you've got anecdotal stories yourself, Christina?
I'm torn between, is there evidence that a merger and acquisition can directly cause a cyber attack versus is it the integration of systems and increase of vulnerabilities that leads to a cyber attack? That's where I'm a little bit torn, and I would probably go with the latter.
And what we're going to see from the discussion that Michael Santarcangelo had is it is the actual makeup of what is happening that's inviting it, I think. And everyone's sort of on kind of high alert during this period of time because it's happening. And then what sort of unfolds afterwards. But we have someone perfect to discuss this very topic with us, and I believe he's had a lot of experience in this area as well. It is none other than the CISO of Primo Water, Andrew Kanata. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
What do most people think it is? And what's the reality?
Alan Alford of the Cyber Range podcast said, quote, I used a fake TechCrunch article about an impending merger. The merger was actually real, but the article was fake, as clickbait on a phishing test. Now, my previous click rates were down in the low single digits, and they shot right back up to over 30% with that one email. I even got the CEO to click. That's when I realized phish clicking stats were useless. If it's compelling enough, people will click. And Derek A. said, quote, I went through a large M&A announced in 2017. It was all over the news. We didn't see any measurable uptick in anything. I don't remember a single phish that was using the M&A as a lure. So two conflicting accounts here, Christina, one who actually used it as a lure, one who actually had one and didn't see a lure. I got to imagine, like, I guess in Derek's case, he just got lucky because I got to assume, you know, like we see this on holiday weekends that you'll get a lot of phishes around the holiday. So people are just targeting an incident, right, Christina?
Yeah, I mean, I think that most people probably think, you know, a little bit like Derek, where they probably think that it's not going to directly cause an uptick. But I think that they're probably assuming that a lot of the cybersecurity risk type discussions are happening through standard IT due diligence during mergers and acquisitions. And they're probably not really thinking about the fact that the systems that are being inherited, which is the reality is that, you know, cyber attacks, they increase significantly during M&A due to the integration challenges and, you know, temporary security gaps. I think comprehensive cybersecurity due diligence, like I said before, is often overlooked. And I actually went and read that, you know, Aon, they estimate that less than 10% of global deals include comprehensive cybersecurity due diligence. So I definitely think that I'm probably more where Alan is. I do think that, you know, where that differs again is probably where is it targeted versus untargeted and the percentage of breaches.
All right, Andrew, you were nodding your head a lot, especially just it's like, hey, it's like around the holidays, or like you even get the attacks during the Super Bowl that mention the Super Bowl.
Right. In fact, I just actually sent out a reminder to our entire population saying, hey, you're going into a long holiday weekend here. Might want to take a half a second and think about things before you click or open an email from somebody that you don't recognize. So I certainly do agree that in times of distraction, whether it's M&A distraction or holiday distraction or just life in general, we are more susceptible to not taking that 5-second pause, deep breath. Why would the CEO be sending me a text telling me that he needs me to be in this meeting and to bring gift cards on the way into the meeting? Anybody with a half a second of pause would say, no, that's not happening. I'm like right down the fence on this with both of the quotes here based on my experience here and in previous organizations.
And the thing is, with a merger and acquisition, so much needs to be communicated. And it's a lot of very high-level information that needs to be communicated and highly sensitive information. So people are actually expecting these kinds of communications at times. So like when you make a comment like that, to your team just about the holidays, that makes sense. But people are expecting this communication, right?
You would hope. The question is, are they reading it? And are they actually paying attention to it? And are they going to take that half-second pause and not click, not open the email, not forward it, or not go to a site to download something that's going to cause all sorts of grief and consternation for them and the rest of the organization later?
Christina, in your experience with merger and acquisitions, do you have a sort of like, you have to do like second factor check type thing? Like if you see something weird, pick up the phone and call the person?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that awareness element is super important. I think that, like I said, I think that a lot of, like to Andrew's point, a lot of focus is on closing the transaction. Well, first it's signing the purchase agreement, it's closing the transaction, and it's, how do we get off the TSA? And all of that is warp speed, is seemingly, right, when you're going through it. And so there's not a lot of focus on how could what we're doing that's in the news be exploited. So I think that awareness is where that comes in. Now, again, to Andrew's point, people have to pay attention and they have to read a little bit, but that's one of the ways to try.
What's our visibility into this problem?
Jeff Pick of Freeport McMoran said, I haven't seen anything related simply to an uptick in attacks based on an announcement. However, I have seen empirical data from sources like Security Scorecard and or BitSight that clearly show a correlation to an overall drop in security posture scores post-merger announcement and even more after merger completion. I can only assume that as uncertainty looms, some of the basics fall to the wayside while the dust settles. And Dwayne S., a global CISO over at Prism HR, said, quote, look at the FedEx acquisition of a European company, the Marriott acquisition of Starlight. It is hard to tell if these incidents occurred because they were targeted or changes that permitted the integration of the computing resources. So it's interesting here, one of the concerns we hear, we've done sessions about mergers and acquisitions, Andrew, and they talk a lot of you are inheriting somebody else's security posture. And how is that happening to you? And one security posture is going to be worse than the other. It's just, they're not going to come in as equals. So the fact that a posture lowers is not a surprise. And that, like what Jeff said about the scores start lowering. So it may just be the inevitable result of inheriting somebody's security posture.
I mean, you can choose your family, right? And there is sarcasm in my voice there. Without question, as you bring on a new entity into your organization or divest an entity, you are going to be inheriting or giving away your security posture in some way, shape, or form. I think, to the earlier point as well, if you're distracted and you are trying to integrate multiple organizations into a single platform or a set of platforms, you're going to miss things. And I have some concern as that happens that just the speed of the deal and the importance of the deal puts you in a position where your maybe your pants aren't all the way down around your ankles, but your fly is a little unzipped there at the top. You don't want to be in that position in a public forum ever. So we certainly take that portion of our due diligence and post-close very seriously in our organization. And we've been very fortunate that that's been the case thus far.
So, Christina, what have you done in the past, because there is going to be a security posture that's going to be lower than another's, and it's conceivable you'll inherit one that's better. Who knows? I mean, does that happen? I have no idea. But that, I guess, has to be acknowledged and has to be dealt with as fast as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. To Andrew's point, it's super important to have, as soon as possible, to have the inclusion at the deal team before the purchasing agreement, to where you can really, do that risk identification to understand if you're doing an acquisition, what you're inheriting, what type of risk exposures you have. And then, as you are implementing or during the deal phase in terms of the TSA, while you're trying to either obtain the systems or in a divestiture, you're doing a carve out, that's where that real-time monitoring, vulnerability management, that's where all those controls come into play. And those can't be a nice to have. Those must be a must have, and they have to be in place from start.
Andy Ellis, who's one of my other co-hosts, when they dealt with mergers and acquisitions, in some elements, they didn't even look. They just said, everyone's getting new computers. They wouldn't even, I don't even want to look at anybody else's computer. Go, everyone's getting a new computer. This is what it is. Get rid of the old ones. Like, I don't care. Kind of a thing.
I was just going to say that I think in large organizations, and because I've been in large and mid-size, and I think in large organizations, that's probably more the norm than not that I've seen. In the mid-size private, I would say it's not. I think that's where you run into less security aware deal teams where.
And it's, by the way, it would be far cheaper probably to just, if you have a much smaller organization, far cheaper to buy 100 computers than to deal with this nonsense.
Oh, I agree. But I think sometimes the problem is that the deal team doesn't still know that they're supposed to involve the IT team or the security team until after they sign the purchasing agreement, right? I would start there. It's like, how do you get to the table before the agreement signed?
Before I go on any further, I do want to tell you about our absolutely spectacular sponsor, and that is Cyera. We all know that data is the largest and fastest growing security attack surface in the world. Every business is using data to collect insights and create new products, but they have to do it without placing the business at risk. Solving data security starts with knowing your data. Now, this is exactly where Cyera's data security platform can help. And this is key. Just identifying your data is essentially the pathway to data security. So, discover your data attack surface, monitor, detect, and respond to data risk, and help govern data use. Let me give you a scenario. Imagine if your organization's OneDrive was compromised by ransomware. Would you know what data was in the OneDrive? Would this trigger a compliance issue? And how much would it cost you to use outside counsel to determine materiality? Cyera delivers the insights you need. Answers all these questions. It all starts with their agentless approach to data discovery, which occurs across any environment, cloud, SaaS, even on premises, making deployment fast and simple. Cyera's classification is based on their own LLM and has an accuracy of 95%. Companies like Paramount Pictures trust Cyera to discover their data, its sensitivity, and who has access to it. To learn more, visit Cyera.io. Let me spell that for you. It's CYERA.io. Go check it out.
What else are we missing?
Rich Mason of Critical Infrastructure said, quote, "The other side of M&A is that a good due diligence process will uncover signs of previous or active compromise." That's interesting. The upside is that it can inform your go/no-go decision, might be a factor in valuation. Are you buying for IP, which is already gone, or for channel, and can inform your integration plans and timeline. And we were just talking about get there in early. And I know, Andrew, you've had good experience with that as well. And I know there's been a lot of complaints from other CISOs not being in early enough. Let me also just add this last quote from Thilak Dharmananda of ES2 Solutions. Quote, in most cases, threat profiles change as the organizations involving the M&A have different culture, technologies, and process, which may conflict, leaving confusions, disagreements, technology protocol mismatches, integrations of systems. Basically, the context changes, threat landscape change, also people and process. So I like kind of just at the very end there just says, a lot of things change. Yes. Christina?
I like what Rich said, which was basically like, I think of what he said almost as like that security by design, right? Or it again is like getting in early. But he's basically saying, that's strategic in the sense that, if you could get in early enough, do the due diligence, then you could find issues that may, save you the heartache later and of maybe you don't do the deal, right? Because it's not what you thought it would be, but doing that early due diligence could show such from a, exposing risk exposure standpoint.
No, and it's critical to your value. Andrew, let me ask you, like, Thilak's response here is so all-encompassing. I get the sense that a merger and acquisition sounds like you're starting a whole new security program again. Has that been your experience?
Well, I don't know if you're actually starting a whole new security program again. What I do know is that you are going to be affecting change in both organizations, right? You are going to be bringing their culture into yours and affecting your culture into their environment. And that's going to be a combination of the information security posture, their privacy, like the whole organization changes drastically post-merger. I do think it really is dependent upon the maturity of the organization that is doing the acquisition and the organization that is being acquired. So I don't have any issue with either one of the quotes here. I think they're actually both accurate. In my previous experience, I have seen both of these things play out over that time. So I don't know if I'm supposed to make a definitive decision on one or the other. I actually like both of them.
Well, the answer, it depends. It sadly is the answer. By the way, very little in security is always one way or the other. In fact, I remember asking the question, is there anything in security that is set it and forget it? And they said, not even ethics are set it and forget it. Because sadly, that changes sometimes too. Christina, coming back to you on this last one, do you feel that you're doing an overhaul of your security program during an acquisition or merger, or it's never that painful?
I've never been through one that is fun. They're all painful at different times. But I always call that growth. But I would say that what you're really doing is that you're looking at the systems that you're inheriting from a standpoint of a controls maturity. I think it is almost like a re-baseline of your security program, and that you're looking at this entity I'm bringing in, from a risk identification to a, what do we have in place that's protecting our environment? What do we have, that's detecting anomalies? What do we have? Can we recover, or how can we respond and recover? I think so. From that sense, you are really doing a mapping to understand how mature is this organization I'm bringing on. And I think about, United Healthcare's acquisition of Change Healthcare. When I say that, I believe, if my understanding is right, that was a Citrix vulnerability that led to that ransomware. And so that's just an example. It's like, did United Healthcare have that in their inventory, right? I'm assuming they did, but it was probably such a speed and they had so much that they might have missed that there was a vulnerability, right? So I think it's not necessarily bringing in or starting over, like Andrew said, but I do think it's integrating what was the controls in the entity that you're acquiring with your current controls for your current organization.
No one said it would be easy.
Corey Wren said, quote, M&A is the perfect time for the goons to slide through. All of the different business areas, talking to new people across the bow they've never talked to before. All the things that got to get done. Perfect time for a hacker to inject themselves into financial processes, recruiting processes, trouble ticket resolution. But the real answer is anytime is the perfect time. But I think Corey kind of hit the nail on the head, saying a lot of this is happening. Why not join in on the fun, right, Andrew?
Yeah. In fact, I've got to meet this Corey guy because he thinks exactly like I do, which God help this gentleman. I agree. when everything is going crazy around you, why not as a bad guy? In my former world, when we were brought in to do attack and penetration testing activities, we would actively do the OPSEC in advance. So we'd go out and do the research, figure out what was going on in that organization's world, and figure out a way to exploit that as a part of the active penetration testing efforts. And if we had the opportunity to do a social engineering project on top of the active pen test, oh, forget it. It was like a kid in the candy store. We had so much fun doing those type of activities during these types of processes. In our world now, we see how things are so crazy. I mean, our organization does multiple acquisitions on an annual basis. We generally mature who we're acquiring. In fact, we almost always mature that organization. But we do that through a pretty defined systematic process. We ensure the training's there. We communicate effectively. We go back to the old, if you see something, say something. We just reiterate it multiple times to put us in a position where we're not working 24 hours, 7 days a week, 360, for several weeks at a time to recover from an incident. So I actually, as soon as we're done with this recording, I'm going to look this Corey Wren fellow up and introduce myself because I agree with what he says without question.
I throw it to you, Christina. Christina, I think Corey just summed up our entire session here, didn't he, with his quote?
Yeah, I think Corey's quote is spot on. It's like the perfect storm, whether it's, human error or insider threats, APTs, system integration, compliance, dealing with third-party risk management. I mean, it's a perfect storm. And and it's definitely the perfect time for goons to slide through.
Let me tell you a quick story. I was talking to my mother, and she was telling me about somebody who had their house broken into. And she goes, they must have known because, they targeted these specific things and took these specific things. I'm like, yeah, of course, why would someone break into a house if they didn't know what they were doing? And I think we have to think about everything like that now. Yes, there are the sort of the mass attacks, let's see who will fall for it, like a sort of a watering hole style attack. But in general, people are going to know something about you. It's like they're going to case out the joint before they actually break in. And so you just kind of assume this is the standard, right, Andrew?
Well, unless they're very lucky or very poor at their job, right? And don't do that research prior to coming in and trying to take out your organization in some way, shape, or form. And there are dumb criminals out there. I mean, we've all seen all the news stories about it. And there are lucky criminals out there as well. So yeah, I agree 100%. If you are going through a time of change in your organization, somebody has to be watching for the bad guys at the gate and knowing that this integration between your organization and the new one is going to cause so much distraction. That's the time that you really need to ratchet it down even more and pay even more attention. And good luck with that. If anybody figures out how to squeeze more hours into a day, give me a call because I'm all ears at this point.
You could use a few extras.
Yeah, amen.
All right. Well, Andrew wants to meet Corey and also anyone who can add more than 24 hours in a day. He's all for that. And I'm assuming Christina is the same way as well. All right, we've come to the portion of our show where I ask both of you, which quote was your favorite? And I think I kind of know the answer because we talked about it a lot here at the end. But I will start with you, Andrew. I'll let you have the first call on this. Your favorite quote and why?
Clearly, my favorite quote was Corey Wren's. And not only the language that he uses, because it's near and dear to my heart, the concept that he put forward makes perfect sense to me, and I couldn't agree with it anymore. Now is the time to pay attention, because if you don't worry, the bad guys are.
Good point. All right. Christina, your favorite quote and why? And you can say Corey again or somebody else.
So my favorite's join us. I do agree that you have to understand that you're probably going to be targeted and, understand that they'll probably look at your profile to figure out how to get in. Just like, your story, David. But I also think that I liked his point where he said it's hard to tell if the actual data breaches or incidents occur because they were targeted, or was it just that you have an influx of, changes in the environment that increase your risk exposure that permitted the integration of vulnerable computing resources. I think that's fair.
Good point. Oh, well. All right. Excellent for both Dwayne and Corey. All right. Well, that brings us to the very end of the show. I do want to thank our spectacular sponsor, and that is Cyera, holistic data security in one cloud platform. We don't hear enough about data security, and that's so bizarre because that's what it's all about, right? Check them out at Cyera.io. All right. I want to thank our guest who is here, Andrew Kanata, who is the CISO over at Primo Water, and also my guest co-host who's been on many times before, Christina Shannon, who is the CIO of Kik Consumer Products. Christina, are you hiring, by the way, at Kik?
Yes, I'm hiring. Check us out at kikcorp.com.
Kikcorp.com. And they can contact you if they questions about any.
Yeah, absolutely. Contact me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thank you to our audience. We greatly appreciate your contributions and for listening to Defense in Depth.
We've reached the end of Defense in Depth. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss yet another hot topic in cybersecurity. This show thrives on your contributions. Please write a review, leave a comment on LinkedIn or on our site, CISOseries.com, where you'll also see plenty of ways to participate, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@CISOseries.com. Thank you for listening to Defense in Depth.